This is my garage floor. As you can see, it has cracks all over it. It's also untreated concrete, 20 years old now, and in this video I want to show you how I made it look like this. And welcome 1 year into the future. This project took quite some time and you will soon see why. But what do you think? Doesn't it look nice? No cracks is anywhere to see, and you can even see the reflection from the lights above me here. Pretty good result if you ask me. However, you will see me stumble across a couple of difficulties. So I have a couple of disclaimers I need to tell you about before I send you back in time. One, the epoxy paint I've been using was given to me for free by Gjøco. They have, however, not been involved in making this video. I've not been paid to make it. All the expenses, except the paint, even the primer, was paid by myself. The second disclaimer is I'm not a professional floor fixer painter. So this is not a video where I'm gonna tell you the best way of fixing your floor. Maybe you can pick up a couple of tips and tricks, and maybe you can avoid doing the wrong things that I might. Anyway, let me take you back in time so you can see how I did it. Before I can start with the paint job, I need to do some preparations. I need to repair the cracks in the floor, I need to prime it, and I also have a small job to do on the walls. Or not really the walls, but the foundation. It's made of quite rough concrete blocks. And 20 years ago, when I built this garage, I used this exact brush to just paint on a thin layer of cement to cover up this. And it's not very pretty. I think I want to improve this before I start painting. I did actually buy this sander with a diamond blade, and I plan to use it to sand not only the foundation but the whole floor with it. I guess the most normal is to rent these machines, and probably a much bigger one to sand the floor, but I will try to use this one to the whole project. Let's see how that goes. But the most important part here now first is to just smoothen over my foundation. I decided to put on a primer first to get a good adhesion. Here you can see me mixing up the cement. And the clue here is, of course, to get exact the right thickness. Not too thick and not too thin. I'm spraying on a thin layer of moist water here, and I sort of regret that because of my priming it wasn't really needed. But you have a longer time then to do the job before the cement starts to dry. You can see me using different kind of methods here to smooth out the cement to get a even and a nice surface. This last step is the most important one. And you get a coarse but a nice and even surface the way I do it here. The cement has dried and my foundation walls are looking much better, ready to be primed and painted. It's actually 1 year ago since I did this plastering. The winter came, I had to postpone this project. Now I'm ready to get on it again. Next job is to deal with the floor and the cracks in the floor. First, I'm grinding away quite a wide area around each crack. To get good adhesion, I will fill each crack with epoxy primer. It's surprisingly how much time I'm spending just moving stuff around. I'm not sure if a bigger grinder would help that much in the total spent time. Here you can see how the cracks looks like after grinding. They are still filled with the dirt from 20 years of usage. To get any epoxy into them, I need to grind them up. I have two different grinders, a big one, a 5-inch grinder. It is very fast to use, electrical one, and then I have a smaller one that is air powered. That is a smaller 3-inch blade, and it's easier to get around the corners. The third method I'm testing is using my sandblaster. I'm using glass beads here to see if that cleans up the cracks even better. And those of you who knows me know I like to overcomplicate my project, so I ended up using all three methods. I started by using my electrical grinder. It's very fast, but it doesn't get tight into the corners, so the small air-powered one was
much better to that. It is slower, and the slowest one is of course the sandblasting machine, which I go over to the end to get a very good adhesion around the crack. I found a total of 26 meters, 85 feet with cracks on my floor.
I have been working 12 to 15 hours so far, 3 evenings, 4 to 6 hours using this machine, grinding the floor. I think that's okay. If you are a bit more in a hurry, maybe you want a bigger and more powerful machine. What I'm about to do now is to start filling up the cracks with epoxy. Maybe this is very obvious for you, but bear with me, because I think some might wonder if I haven't made the problem worse by grinding up the cracks. Now they are even bigger than they were originally. But the reason for it is to avoid it cracking up again. Even though my garage is 20 years old now, and I think most of the garage has settled, not that much movement, but the building is moving constantly. I have snow on the roof at the winter. I'm driving in my car, I'm using heavy machines, and vibrations and movements might cause it to crack up again. To avoid that, or try to limit that happening, is to have a wider crack. So if the floor is moving up or down, sideways, or bending, if I have a bigger crack, the paint that is in between have some elasticity so it can move. If it's a very slim crack, let's say it's 0.5 millimeter, and my floor is moving 0.5 millimeter, that 0.5 millimeter needs to expand 100%, needs to go from 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter. Now my cracks are around 5 to 8 millimeters. And of course, a 0.5 millimeter movement, it's just 10% expansion. Hopefully, the epoxy has so much elasticity that it can cope with some movement in the floor without it cracking up again. So, next job now is to go to my setup here, where I'm gonna mix up the primer. Welcome to my laboratory. It's quite a simple but professional setup I have here. I have some cans to mix the primer to, and a scale to measure the correct mix of primer and hardener. I prepared a bottle and 3D printed some caps. You will see later how I'm going to use it. The epoxy I'm using, both the primer and the paint, is from Gjøco. It's a Norwegian brand, professional level grade product. It's used in industry, shopping malls, storage facilities, workshops all over Norway and Scandinavia actually. We have of course only quality products made here in Norway, and this is no exception to that. So what happens now? I'm going to mix up this in the cup, and then I have 30 minutes to lay it down on the floor.
I'm putting on my protection gear. This is a solvent-free primer. It has no bad smell at all, so that's pretty nice. Here I'm mixing 2/3 of primer and 1/3 of hardener. I'm using my scale to get it correct, ending up with 400 grams. That should be suitable to fit into a 1/2 liter bottle, a soda can, brusflaske, as we say here in Norway, that I have prepared for applying the primer to the cracks. I have 3D printed several caps with different hole sizes, starting with a 2 millimeter nozzle. And here you can see my idea, pouring the primer into the cracks using this bottle. The 2 millimeter nozzle was a bit small. You can see this is real-time speed. It takes too long time. So I tried the 3 millimeter nozzle, and that works perfectly. This gave me very good control on pouring most of the primer into the crack, but also a bit to the side to get good adhesion. This will of course be sanded down. The excess material will be grinded to get a flat, even surface before I do the proper priming of the whole floor. I must say, this was a really satisfying task, the most fun part of the project so far. I had to go over multiple times because I could see the primer get sucked into the cracks. And on the last batch, I added Silothics, a thickening agent, to lay on top of the widest cracks to avoid it just sinking down into the cracks.
It's the next day and everything looks great. Well, that is, I can see some low spots in some of the widest cracks. I think maybe I need to refill one more time. But that will be after I've done the complete grind of the floor. And maybe you can hear the echoey sound now because I've cleaned away all my stuff. I've emptied my garage, ready for the big grind.
I decided to divide my floor into 12 zones, starting with the inner corner. If you notice carefully, you might see I'm dragging around with my anvil, and it's a reason for that.
This grinder works very well, but it's not very heavy. So I need to put some force to push it down to get some speed. What I thought, if I put this anvil on top of it, like this, it helps a lot on pushing it down. I can't use it when I'm going alongside the walls and into the corners, then it's just in the way. So I tried to use some strips, put it on here. It helped a lot, but it was a bit difficult to maneuver it. So I 3D printed this adapter. And this now fits on top like this. And then I can put my anvil on top of this again and then use the strips to tie it down. So now I can easily take this off, use the grinder normally, and then just put this on top here. And yeah, let me try the next zone with this contraption and see if it makes it any easier.
And indeed it was. Not only because of the extra weight, but also because it became taller. I could sit on my chair or even stand upright. So it absolutely was a great improvement and made the grinding a lot more convenient. But it had its downsides as well. More about that later. I'm glad I decided to divide my floor into zones because it didn't feel like that big of a job then. In average, I spent 1 hour per zone. It differed a lot depending on how rough the cement was on different parts of the floor. I'm not really sure if I would recommend you to grind down a whole garage using a small grinder like this.
The small grinder did its job. And yeah, the floor looks nice now. But I've spent a total of, I think, around 20 hours grinding with this small grinder. If you count in grinding over the cracks first and then the rest of the floor. And of course, this small grinder isn't really designed to have a big anvil on top of it. And yeah, and also me maybe pushing it a bit hard. The last part of the grinding, it started to vibrate, and you can see now here, or maybe here, I think the main shaft here, the main bearing, didn't like it. It started to vibrate at the end, so I couldn't really use the heavy anvil on top here at the last part of the grind. Also, I had a couple of accidents. I didn't pay enough attention. I was moving the hose and I tilted it. It's a bit top heavy, you know, with the anvil here. So got knocked on the side and it started to dance around on the floor. And I have some damage I need to repair now. But yeah, and maybe the main shaft didn't like that. So it was a good idea at the start. And then it wasn't that good of an idea anyway. But now I'm done with the floor, ready to start the priming, except I have some small damage in the floor I wanted to fix first. I have a couple of these damages in the floor. The paint will not cover them, I think. I already used my sandblaster to clean it, so now it's ready to put on some more primer there. And also, some of the cracks, the primer just kept going down into the crack, so I need to fill up a bit more.
Then it's the same procedure as last time, mixing primer and hardener. You will also see me adding a couple of pinches of silo thicks, or just ticks as the pros call it. I keep on adding more and more until I get a creamy consistency, so I more or less transformed the primer to a filler. I'm trying to add a bit more than really needed. This is going to be sanded down with the grinder later, and then it will be a completely flat surface.
It's the next day. The primer has dried, ready for the last and final grind. Hopefully my grinder lives a bit longer. As you can see now, I have all these spots I need to grind down. When I used this scraper to apply the putty-like primer, I get a very thin layer here. So it should go pretty fast now. A quick job to just grind over it, to get it flat. And that got me thinking, when I filled the cracks, I used primer and pour it from a bottle to get it deep into the cracks and to get good adhesion. Seems to have worked perfectly, but it was a lot of excess material I had to grind down. And this is pretty hard. It takes some time to grind it, and especially where I got this hump I had to grind down, took some time. So yes, it was faster to just pour it out of the bottle compared to work it with the scraper. But it took longer time to grind it. And of course, I used a lot more unnecessary material as well. So maybe it would have been better to just make this creamy, putty-like primer to fill all the cracks. But then I'm not sure if I would have got so much into the cracks. I'm not sure really. Now I've used both methods, and I'm pretty sure at least I've filled the cracks the best I could. But if you have some insight into this, if one or the other method is better or good enough, let me know in the comments. Okay, next then, the final grind. Finally, I'm more or less done with the dirty part of the job. Now I vacuumed the whole garage, also this foundation wall. It's time to start the nicer job. Which requires me to change my clothes over to some proper... Thank you. I'll take it from here. What do you think about my fashionable and professional painter's clothes? Pretty nice, or what? So, my next job is now to prime and paint the foundation walls.
You can wait the maximum 24 hours from the priming to the painting. If you wait longer than that, then you need to sand down the primer to get good enough adhesion for the paint. So yeah, that's the reason why I split up the job. And keeping track of the time, I have a tips for you here.
Okay, set countdown 25 minutes.
Sure, 25 minutes. And we're starting now.
Having a smart speaker in your garage is so useful. When your hands are dirty or occupied with other work, you always can ask for help like this, keeping track of the time. Because you have 30 minutes to work with it. I found I could keep it going longer than 30 minutes, but it started to thicken then. So it's best to just follow the instructions. And at least with the Google Home speaker, I can always ask how much time is remaining. And when 25 minutes has passed, the speaker will let me know, and I know I have only 5 minutes to finish up.
It's the next day. The primer has dried, ready for the first paint job. Before I start, I must say, this primer, it's so easy to work with. It has just the exact consistency, not too thin, not too thick. Very easy to apply and get an even surface. I got the tip that I could actually mix in a bit of the Silotix to it to get it a bit thicker, if I wanted to. I didn't feel I needed to, because my foundation wall is quite coarse. And you can see when I painted it, it like more or less sucked the primer into it. So yeah, I think this is quite a nice result. So I will do the same with the paint. Even the paint, you could add some Silotix if you want it thicker. I will try without.
It's a much easier procedure to mix the paint, 4 parts with the epoxy and 1 part with the hardener. And yes, by the way, here is the roller and the brush from the priming. As you can see, it gets really hard. I have been able to reuse my paint mixing cup using isopropanol or rødsprit, as we use here in Norway. But I don't think it's possible to reuse any brush or roller, because this epoxy gets really hard when it dries. Then it's the same procedure as the priming. Mixing up for 3 minutes, and then you have half an hour to apply it. I must say the paint was a bit more tricky to apply than the primer. It is always a challenge to paint over a dark surface with a brighter color. So it needs a thicker coat, of course, to cover it all. And what you see here is I applied too thin. So I had to go over one more time to get it a bit thicker. And then in some places it became too thick and it started to sag. As I got more experience, I applied a heavier coat right away, as you can see here. And then I didn't have to go over one more time. It might have been smart to add some Silothics to get a thicker paint, but all in all, I was quite happy with the result. And then it's finally time to get some primer onto the floor. The buckets you get from Gjøco is oversized, so it's easy to just pour the hardener into the bucket where the primer or the paint is. I got my wife to help me apply the primer. She is pouring out the primer onto the floor and uses a squeegee to move it around, and I am rolling over with a regular roller, a quite wide one. This was also a very nice job. It's so easy to work with this primer. Applying it, making it flow and get an even coat on the floor was, very, very easy. And you can see here how nice the result is. Or at least I thought so.
Look at this beautiful shiny floor, ready to be painted. Unfortunately, I have some really bad news. This part of the garage is pretty good. And this part of the garage I have been used not that much. It's where I drive in my cars. It's the other end of the garage I have been using most. And unfortunately, I have a lot of these areas. This is maybe the worst one. And I can actually remember for a couple of years ago, I spilled a lot of oil at this exactly spot on the floor. And I guess it has still been oil residue remaining in the floor, in the pores of the concrete, even after I have sanded it. And now the primer has reacted with the oil or the silicone or whatever stuff has been in my cement and caused this pattern. So what I have done is to make a small batch of the paint, and I will just try it to see what happens. It doesn't seem like the paint has the same problem as the primer. The paint looks much better. Of course, I can see some wavy surface where the bubbles have been, but I can live with that. I think I'll just paint it over these bubbles. Let's see how it goes.
What I could have done was, of course, to mix up more primer, added Silothics, and just repaired these bubbles. But then I would have exceeded the 24 limit time for painting directly over it, and I would have had to sand down the whole floor before painting. And I really didn't want to do that. I want to have this adhesion, this chemical adhesion between the primer and the paint within this 24 limit period. We used a total of 15 liters of primer and 20 liters of paint. And that was quite a heavy coat. And at this point, I was quite curious how the end result was gonna be.
It's 5 days ago since the floor was painted. The instruction says you should wait 6 days before it's fully hardened. So tomorrow I will start to put in my stuff here again. You are probably curious, how did it go? Am I satisfied with the floor? And I would say this part of the floor, as I mentioned with the primer, everything was totally perfect at this end of the garage. Maybe I can see some bubbles here. If I get the lights in the correct angle, I'm not sure if you can see anything, but I would say this half of the garage, it's just perfect. While on this end, I can see a lot of bubbles here, but it's not like I have to look for it to see it. And so all in all, yes, I am very satisfied. It's so clean and it's so nice in here now. As you can see, I haven't even put on my shoes yet. So yeah, this is just, for me, my dream floor. And the problem now, of course, are the walls. Looks very dirty and old. So yeah, so now I gotta paint the walls as well. But yes, maybe we could take a look here where I had the big problem. Yes, this is definitely the worst area. I'm not sure if you can see it. You have to crawl around on the floor and get the lights in the right angle, then you can see this wavy surface. But on a garage floor, on a workshop, it doesn't really matter, does it? What's important is that the surface is strong, easy to keep clean. And for me, especially here, since I use this for parking my cars, when the floor gets wet, I want to use my squeegee to get the water out of here and get it dry to the weekend. Looking forward to that. Knock on epoxy. Let's hope this reaction that happened here has not caused any problem with the adhesion. Would hate this to start peel off after some years. If that should happen, I'll let you know. For now, everything seems to be perfect here. I can highly recommend both the products here and the way I did it, and maybe you can even do it better. Let me know in the comment section if you have any questions or suggestions. Hope to see you again in the next video. Maybe I'll have to start painting my walls.